Hi folks, it's just gone 5 o'clock, which means it is once more time to get live in the Splash Zone, where we talk all things oceans with an ocean scientist. It was just World Oceans Day on Monday, so happy belated World Oceans Day to everyone. We're keeping things going. We're celebrating with a rather special show featuring not one, not two, but in fact 3 guests. So we have here with us today Sahira Bell, who is a PhD candidate working with us in the Oceans Institute. Sarah, do a wave. We also have Brinkley Davies, who is the founder of the Balu Blue Foundation. She's a marine biologist and former Australian of the Year nominee. There she is. We also have Stefan Andrews, who is a marine scientist and underwater videographer, currently the director of ocean imaging. So we're going to be doing a deep dive today, talking about passion, science communication, and conservation in the Great Southern Reef, as well as beyond. We're going to be going deep in, I guess, every sense of the word. We're going to be exploring this wonderful region in the southern part of our continent, but also be looking at passion and inspiration and how we can, I guess, mine those feelings to create positive change in things that we care about in the world. You're going to get to know Sarah, Brinkley, and Stefan pretty well by the end of today. As always, the chat log is open. If you've got any questions, please do drop them in. I've got my list right here, as usual, but it's pretty sparse at the moment. So if you've got any better ones or deeper ones, please do join at the chat log at any time. I guess starting with a bit of a shallow splash, I feel like I've given you a really inadequate introduction. I've given you like literally half a line pulled from your LinkedIn. Do you mind just introducing yourselves a little bit deeper and telling us what you do and who you are and what your life's all about? I guess we'll start with Sarah, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think you pretty much summed it up. I'm doing my PhD at UWA. I think I've technically got about 6 months left, but definitely not counting. And I'm really interested in temperate reefs and kelp forests and how they are being impacted by climate change and ocean warming. So a lot of my research is based up and down the West Coast, and this is an area that has been super impacted by ocean warming over the past decade or so. And so I've been trying to really understand these impacts and understand how these systems are changing in response to that.
Awesome. And we'll get to find out more about your research later on in the show. But Brinkley, introduce yourself. I've given you, I guess, 3 points out of your very impressive CV. Who are you really?
Oh, it's a hard question to ask. But I founded Balu Blue just over 3 years ago now, after a few years after finishing my marine biology degree. I worked in a lot of different areas, like marine tourism. I did a lot of volunteering in different places around the world, and just kind of saw a lot of things that I wanted to help. I wasn't interested in just focusing on one thing. So that's where the motivation came to start my own organization. And that's like where I met amazing people like Sarah and Stefan. And yeah, I'm from South Australia originally. So the whole Great Southern Reef and area down there has been like a big part of the whole reason why I got into marine conservation and marine science and all of this.
Literally and metaphorically close to your heart.
Yeah, so it's been like a really passionate area to get involved in, and a really important to protect, I think. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a little sum up of what I do, amongst the rest.
And we'll get into the rest later on. Lastly but not leastly, Stefan, please tell us more about you.
Sure thing. Yeah, I've got I'm basically a marine biologist, but also I've dabbled in several different fields. Currently, I'm also a filmmaker and educator, but these have been sort of different pathways that at the moment are all coming together with this Great Southern Reef project that I've been working on. But I did my honours actually at UWA, shout out to the Wernberg lab, and I was doing my research on the temperature sensitivity of some seaweeds following a marine heatwave over there in Western Australia. And after that, I got awarded this scholarship to travel right around the world, gaining experience in underwater-related fields. That was a scholarship by Rolex. And that really broadened my horizons about what's possible in terms of marine conservation, filmmaking in particularly, like got my attention and interest And that's where I could really see potential to make a big impact. But before going on and like making educational films, I really wanted to go back to uni and train to become an educator, and then also get some experience working in schools. So high school teacher, after being a marine scientist, field scientist for a while, but then also most recently, bringing the filmmaking with the education and also the marine biology together.
Awesome. And we're going to get to know you pretty well over the course of this. So feel free to drop your questions in about any of these awesome lives at any point in the show. But I do want to get started on our many, many talking topics for today. One of them being Balibu Foundation. I guess this is primarily Brinkley's project, or is this a shared project between all of you?
Well, I started it, and I started it so that I'm like really passionate about involving like people and people coming together for different things. I guess like in science, when I did my degree in the science fields I worked in, I found a lot of it is like isolated. So like if you're focusing on one thing, it tends to be like everyone's kind of does things and focuses on their own thing. And I really know the power of like coming together for different things, science or non-science related. So yeah, with Balu Blue, I just saw like a big gap there, an opportunity to use like my audience that I had and my like travels and my connections to be able to like have more of an impact. And I know that there's so many people like that are interested in marine science and marine conservation that want to get involved. And yeah, that was kind of what like drove me to start my own charity. And I'm also similar to Stefan. Like my job is predominantly like filming and photography. And so instead of going down the path of like academics, I wanted to like, I guess it's more like storytelling. But I found what was having such a big impact in getting people to be inspired to make change either in their own lives or like be a part of bigger projects, was like when they visually can see stuff. And I think it's really powerful. And so with Balu Blue, that's been like a big thing as well. And especially with like the Great Southern Reef, that's I think it's going to help that area a lot. So yeah, that's kind of where it all started, and kind of what I do for work.
So it sounds like it's a real passion project, right? So you started it
and we have like land-based side. I spent a couple of years raising a kangaroo joey, and I love land-based wildlife as well so much. But then the marine side of things is obviously so broad, and with anyone that's done a marine science degree, like you kind of finish it and you're like, oh my God, what do I do?
Dara, that's pro tip, your future. No, I'm kidding.
But it's like, it's funny because it's such a broad area. Like, and I went down all the different routes. Like I went down like the volunteering route, the like opportunity to do academics, and then marine tourism, where you're actually getting to physically experience like being around marine wildlife and being involved in science at the same time. And yeah, with Balu Blue, I have like some big goals, like when I started it, that are really like starting to come together and involving other people that are really valuable to like each area. And one of those is the Great Southern Reef, and people like Sarah, who spend their life studying the like base layers of the ecosystem. And yeah, so it's been really inspirational for me as well, because I find myself all over the world, and I think that it's like really important to remember what we have in our own backyard. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess, like where we're at with it.
So I'm really curious about how you got, because you obviously said that you're interested in finding people with, I guess, the skills to help you bring out your vision. And I'm impressed, I guess, with the diversity of skills between the three of you. We've got Sarah, who came on board as predominantly a scientist, I'm guessing, and yourself with your background in volunteer work and now running this charity. And Stefan, of course, is a photographer. The three Oceaneers coming together. How did that happen? Like, where did you meet, and what do you all bring that you find to be the secret recipe to this?
How did we meet? I don't even remember.
Actually, I think we met just over socials. I was trying to apply for this little grant, and the grant needed an on-the-ground group or an organisation to kind of help it out. And I'm pretty sure I literally like emailed you or messaged you or something and said, hello, I have an idea. I need a charity. Do you want to be involved? And it kind of just went on from there. And we didn't even get that grant, but I think the projects that have come from it, we got everything. Yeah. I think the projects that have come from it, I'm super stoked with how it's all moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's so important as well. I think like the more like diverse the backgrounds, the more reach you have with everything. And I mean, it's been a big part of like what I do in general is like collaborating with people, and it's so powerful pulling like people from different fields with different skill sets and coming together. You can make really cool stuff happen. So yeah, that's
definitely how I see it as well. I think one thing I really realized whilst doing my PhD is that scientists are definitely not the best people to convince people about important topics like the Great Southern Reef or climate change, big ones like that. And I think that's because we are always so convinced about the data and about graphs. And that's because we've been trained like that. That's how we think. But that's not how the general community thinks. And that's not what changes people's minds. And I think it's things like stories and impactful messages that really have that capacity to change people's minds. And I think this collaboration just really encompasses the whole kind of trifecta of science delivered by using impactful stories and impactful messages. And I think, we really cover all the bases there.
I think
there's so many people right across this region, like the Great Southern Reef, with really inspirational and powerful stories, but also stories of how like changes have been occurring in our own backyard, how climate's been impacting like fishes and all sorts of inspirational stories that really is what people connect with, is what Sahira was saying, rather than just facts and figures. Because when people see someone sharing their personal story, opening up what's happening in their lives, that's what really like people connect with.
Yeah.
And I think
visually seeing things, like experiencing like things for yourself. Like for me, it's been the biggest thing I've ever done, actually physically going to places and like freediving with things, being in the water with things, seeing them for myself. And that's where has led me to where I am, is going to the places and seeing it for myself. Because like Sahira said, with science, it's almost sometimes like unmotivating in certain science communities, because it's like a lot of real facts, and then you need a voice to get it to the general public in a different language. Or like I know 100% what you mean. So yeah, I think that's why it's so good. And
seeing and believing. Unfortunately, it really is. And also the other thing, of course, is the picture tells 1,000 words. It crosses boundaries. It contains actually much more emotion and information in it than perhaps an equivalent graph. And this is where I guess Stefan's work is really interesting. How important do you think it is that, like, how much weight do you think your photography carries in something like this, this kind of project? Do you see the changes based on just the reactions to your photographs? How do you see yourself and the work that you do?
Well, what we're really trying to achieve here is inspire more people to get out and experience it for themselves. Exactly like what Brinkley was saying. That's what really is what gets people to care about these places. And for too long, people have only have dismissed sort of like diving along southern Australia because of the water temperature. That's no excuse anymore, because like we've got really like great technology with wetsuits these days. There's so much to explore out there, and it's really addictive. But what it just takes is that initial like initiation and getting part of a group and getting out and amongst it. And that often starts at that high school level. And that's kind of where I'm aiming a lot of the work that I'm making at the moment, in conjunction with the Great Southern Reef project that we've been working on in association with National Geographic. That grant was to make a unit of work directly aimed at high school students, which I'm really excited to announce is really close to being finished. and it will be available for online use as well for teachers right along this region. But that's where we can really start seeing changes happen and impact happen into the future, when more and more people are getting involved in local community groups. And yeah, it's just a lot of what we're doing at the moment is just trying to get people to understand that there is this incredible reef system out there. There is so many amazing dive sites. There's places that you can go and enjoy. You don't have to be a diver or a snorkeler, but the more people get out there and experience it for themselves and get involved with people doing great work, then the more we're going to see this area continue to flourish and thrive into the future, which is really what we're going for here.
That's beautiful. Speaking of activities and getting people moving and doing things, there's a question that's just come through from the chat log, going back to Baluglu actually, and main activities. So Julia Dorenzo asked, "Hi guys, what are the main activities of the Baluglu Foundation?"
Oh, so at the moment, well, over summer we actually were fully focused on trying to help get funds because of the bushfires that hit South Australia and Victoria and New South Wales. So usually we like split it between land and sea. So with the land side, it's mostly like educational, like help within the wildlife rescue community. So not only like carers and smaller wildlife charities, but also like educational things like a guide on like how to rescue a kangaroo from the roadside and that kind of thing. And we also fund like a few different smaller wildlife rescues that are not on the map, that like anyone that's looked after a kangaroo or possum or anything knows that it's expensive. So we help out quite a few smaller wildlife carers and rescues. And then on the marine side and the ocean side, we're involved in a few different projects, but now we're trying to focus on the Great Southern Reef and educational stuff mostly around that at the moment. So awareness, I think, is like the starting point, which is where we're all working together on this, because it's so important. And I think in Australia, there's a lot of focus on like tropical coral reefs, so like Great Barrier Reef and the Ningaloo, which are beautiful, obviously, but there is a massive lack of knowledge and awareness about the whole southern end of Australia. And I know that very well from living there and dealing with, you know, big oil threatening it and all of that. So yeah, especially for me, it's really something that over the next like 12 months, I'm definitely going to be focusing on a lot for the marine conservation side. So yeah, we're working on like a bit of a plan for that at the moment in the marine side. Yeah.
Awesome. Actually, there's another question that's on that exact topic, on conservation and our local environment. This is actually a bit of a tricky one, I guess. Callum Dempsey wants to know, as a possible discussion point, ultimately, industries, businesses that impact the marine environment work within the regulations set by government. How do we influence policy to make changes? How do we, mere mortals, mere people of the land?
Well, it's a hard one. I mean, in my experience, there's not one answer to that, and it is like with different topics and different issues. There can be like, obviously people turn to like petitions and coming together like as communities, which sometimes work and sometimes don't. And then you have other ways to go about that to get policy change, like directly dealing with people in charge or politicians, and you know, coming from like especially a science point of view where you have like proof of impact and stuff like that. All of those areas are what can create change, as well as community pressure. So like if there's community pressure to protect an area or to change a policy because it's well known that it's damaging an area, that's where I've seen people like local governments or in like industries make change. So it's kind of like a very broad, it's very dependent on the issue and dependent on the local government. Good
answer. Encompassing answer. I think there's a lot there that if you wanted to, please do go and have your own little bit of a search and see what you can do locally and perhaps on a bigger scale, just to make the change that you can.
I wish it was easier to make changes on a larger scale.
What you want is a clear answer. These are the 3 steps that you do, and you're guaranteed to preserve the environment going forward. But perhaps not as easy as that in real life, but still worth doing.
Yeah. I think also on that point, well, one thing that I've kind of realised through this whole COVID ordeal is the Australian government has the capacity to respond really quickly when they want to a crisis, and they can pull funds just like that and respond so quickly. And that's one thing, personally, for me, the bar has been raised. And if we can see a response like that for an issue, for a health issue, then I think that we need to raise our expectations and to push them a bit more to see those kind of results for the climate as well.
Yeah.
And I guess key to that, of course, is to keep all of the wonderful work going, keep the imagery coming. Question on imagery, that's my awkward segue. Wayne Walters wants to know, question for Stefan this time, what sort of images really capture people's attention for marine conservation? I've heard that using too many pics of wildlife in distress, dead, entangled, doesn't actually work. Comment.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Hard one.
It's a tricky one because, like, working with kids, they easily will switch off if they get too like overwhelmed by too many like animals that are like choking on plastic and birds filled with plastic. It is important to see these kind of images, but and also coral bleaching is a really like striking
We've all seen
example
it, the sea of
how
white.
the climate is changing the coral reefs. But with our kelp forests, we are seeing changes, but visually it's a little bit trickier to show in a dramatic way, because in a lot of cases it's just one seaweed species that could be getting taken over by a different seaweed species, or you got similar looking fish moving and tropicalization of reefs, and there's a lot going on there. It's very complex, but it's not like this alarming and striking imagery.
So is this, I guess, an issue that you see more with the temperate reefs? The issues with the kelp and so forth?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And with warming waters on both the east and west coasts, and also in Tasmania, we're seeing changes in the kelp, the kelp that forms the backbone of the Great Southern Reef, the golden kelp, that's been retracting in areas. But we've seen just sort of different seaweeds move in. But the urchin barrens that we're seeing in some areas, which is a dramatic change because there's no seaweed at all. These kind of images are what I'm using to teach the kids about understanding a high productivity, high biodiversity reef versus low productivity, low biodiversity. And those kind of things are like visually very different. So that's good. It's good to be able to show those kind of things. There's definitely a tricky element with like showing some of the changes here on the Great Southern Reef. But then the question about, like overwhelmingly negative things. From my personal experience, I've found that often, students will kind of like switch off a bit. They're important, but in I guess some sort of like moderation, but also provided with context too about solutions and what can be done at the same time.
Yeah. I think that's where the title of the show is really interesting, protecting what you love. There's two sides of that. There's the protecting part because it's being damaged, but then there's also reminding yourself of what you love. And that's why I love your images, because they're so lush and evocative, and to me they give me creepy feelings, but in a good way. I get the goosebumps going down the body, which is always a good reaction. I know that we brought along a few to show and tell. So Stefan, if you're comfortable, shall we print out the photos?
Yeah, one thing that I thought might be cool to bring up first is the sponge gardens, because this is something that I kind of wanted to mention. There's a lot of, we think of the Great Southern Reef down here as the seaweed-covered rocky reefs, which they are. But when you start going a little bit deeper than where most recreational scuba divers would go, you reveal this hidden world that few people have really seen, and that's what really excites me to get down to some of these deeper depths and showcase just what's down there, because already we know this is an understudied area. So it's been suggested only about 10% of the funding to marine research goes towards temperate reefs. But then that's in sort of your top 30 meters is a relatively easy area to do research. When you start going deeper than that, it gets very challenging for scuba, and you start reaching limits very quickly. But that's where things get super interesting down along the Great Southern Reef too. And we've got these incredibly colourful and diverse areas that are just covered with all sorts of crazy marine life. And a lot of them, we've just got no idea, unclassified, undocumented species, but all of these gnarly looking sponges. And
I love them. They're like little weird orange fingers going up.
Yeah. And that's just the beginning. And there's just so much that we don't quite understand that's beneath that. But moving up closer to the surface, we've got our golden kelp, which has been forever called the common kelp. But as part of this project, we've been there's been a bit of discussion about sort of making kind of reigniting the name here as the golden kelp, which is a little bit more I think
it's much more interesting, isn't it?
Justice a little bit better. It is golden. It is incredibly valuable to Australia, not only with all of the carbon that it's sucking up, but creating all of the homes, the houses for all the fish, and they're incredibly productive reefs. And it's that golden kelp that stretches right along the southern coast of Australia, all the way from Kalbarri in Western Australia to right up to the border of New South Wales and Queensland. And that's anyone that's jumped in the water along that region, that's most likely the kelp that forms the forest. And just because that's there, all these other species are able to jump in as well and thrive. So that's what we're considering the boundary, the borderline of this interconnected system of the Great Southern Reef. But it's not the only seaweed species. In fact, there is a lot of seaweed species along the Great Southern Reef.
Fantastic. We've got them all here.
You got the list.
There's over 1,400 species, and a lot of them are only found in Australia.
Known ones, yeah.
Yeah. About 75% of them are found nowhere else out of the red algae species. And this is just an example of how special this place is. And so I'm just trying to see what other images we've got there.
I've got some giant kelp.
A lot of marine life actually lives in and among the seaweed, like the seahorses and sea dragons. And then also so many species of little crabs and invertebrates, all sorts of things. And then down in Tasmania, we've got some areas of giant kelp still remaining, but there's unfortunately...
So that's the iconic really tall one that just stretches up like a column.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, the fastest growing seaweed in the world, really super productive, but unfortunately there's only about 5% of those dense giant kelp forests remaining to what there once was, which is quite alarming.
I think maybe a question that people probably will want to know is why are there only such a small amount of them remaining, of the giant kelp?
So, do you want to do that one, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I can start us off with that one. So that's the culprit we all know too well, is climate change and ocean warming and the impacts that we as humans are having on these marine environments. Not just for the giant kelps or giant seaweeds over in Tassie, but for the golden kelp in the west coast and on the south coast as well. we're seeing that the impacts of gradual ocean warming and also the impacts of marine heat waves are having truly devastating impacts on these ecosystems. An example was back in 2011 on the West Coast, we had what we call the Ningaloo Nino, and it was this extreme marine heat wave, which was just completely unprecedented. It was like nothing we had seen before, and it was so devastating on our seaweed communities. But it's not just this component of heat which is detrimental. It's with the heat, it brings with it tropical species or organisms that like to live in warmer waters. So if you think down the west coast of Australia, it goes from these tropical coral reefs down to our really cool water seaweed reefs. And when this heat wave happened, it brought warm water all the way down the West Australian coastline. And with that warm water came all these tropical organisms who, for example, like some fish, in a coral reef environment, their role is to consume algae to keep it at really low levels so that the coral can have space to grow. So you can imagine that when these tropical fish moved into seaweed environments, they just absolutely went to town. And in some areas, we lost 100% of our kelp forests because of this heat and then this ongoing herbivory that we observed in their system. So this has been this is a big point of my PhD research, is trying to understand what happened and why it happened and why the system isn't recovering on the West Coast. But we're seeing very similar things on the East Coast and also in Tassie. Yeah, this impact of heat.
So you called it the, is it the Ningaloo Nino?
Nino, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So like the El Nino, but local to Ningaloo?
Yeah, so because it was driven by a particularly strong Lewin current that year, and the Lewin current was really strong at a weird time of year. So normally on the West Coast, this current that runs from the north to the south is really strong during winter. So when it brings down all this warm water, it doesn't really matter because our waters are quite cool during the winter. But the weird thing that happened was the Lewin current kicked up at the peak of our summer. So it brought down hot water when our oceans were already at their warmest during the peak of summer. And yeah, it just was devastating.
So was this like an isolated event, or was this part of a series of similar events that you're starting to see?
Oh, it's definitely marine heat wave or extreme marine heat waves are definitely increasing in frequency and also intensity as climate change continues to impact our ecosystems. This was a discrete event, so it was just like we get heat waves on land. There'll be a period of a week or 10 days of really hot temperatures, and that happened in the ocean, but it was a period of months. And for organisms like seaweeds and even like corals in tropical environments, they can't move and escape this hot water. So they're stuck and they have to deal with the conditions that they're found in.
I remember when that happened up here, it was a lot of fish dying, like so many fish died. The water was murky for like months. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, does it recover, or is there a period of time where things might be uncertain as to whether it's coming back?
Definitely a period of uncertainty, and that's what a big chunk of my research looked at. So I worked specifically out of places like Kalbarri. So this is a region where it had some of the most lush kelp forests that we had in the whole of the West Coast, and now there's not a single kelp there. And my work was looking at, okay, over these last 5 years or so, the ocean temperatures have returned to normal. They're nice and cool now. So why aren't our kelps coming back? And it kind of seems like these ecosystems have moved into they've undergone a phase shift. So they are no longer going to be these beautiful, expansive kelp forests. The system has changed too much. We've put too much, had too much of an impact on them, and it looks like they're not going to go back.
That's deeply tragic, actually. And as an outsider who doesn't know the ins and outs of marine science, I completely agree with Stefan. It's definitely less well known and less iconic an image for, I guess, various reasons. Actually, in general, why do you think the Great Southern Reef is less well known than Australia's other great reefs? We mentioned, obviously, the Great Barrier Reef. Ningaloo is locally quite famous, but I think the Great Southern Reef doesn't quite ring the same bell, at least for most people. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's funny because actually around 70% of Australians actually live within 50 kilometres of a temperate reef. But a lot of people just haven't heard of it because within that 70%, a lot of people are concentrated around the major cities. And between Adelaide and Perth, for anyone that's done that drive, there's not much there on land. There's very few. There's just a few small towns. Or basically, between like Ceduna and like Esperance and Albany, there's not a lot. But in the water, there's just hundreds of kilometres of these kelp forests, but they get very rarely visited. And just while we're talking about like all of the like negative components of climate change, I just want to bring in here that we do still have a lot of really like healthy reefs too, which I've been lucky enough to visit and film in recent years. And there's still like so much that we've got there that we really should care for and look after. But in terms of why it's less well known, well, coral reefs, you know, they easily get a lot of attention wherever they are. They are really beautiful ecosystems to spend time in. They're also often much more like accessible for divers. They're much more kind of like just well known in general as these like rich biodiversity hotspots. But along southern Australia, not only we've got these like isolated areas, it's like a lot of the water is relatively. It's pretty cold. It's not the coldest water we've got. Definitely. Something that puts a lot of people off, like visually seeing it. But what people don't kind of realize is sort of the value of it being just over $10 billion annually in like fisheries and tourism alone. But I think it's the interconnectedness of it that people don't realize, that you could actually classify this as a great reef system. Because, you know, it could be all the way over in Western Australia and people can be raving about, we got the best like fishing spots here, surfing breaks, and look, this is like my cool like favourite species, or leafy sea dragon, for example. But then a couple thousand kilometres away, we've got a very similar ecosystem. You've still got that golden kelp forming as the foundation species there. And we've got very similar kind of like rocky reefs with offshore islands. And there's a lot of interconnectivity with the way that the fish larvae move around and the movement of fish along southern Australia, like the southern bluefin tuna, for example, and they forage along the Great Southern Reef. There's so much more interconnectedness than people realize, and that's kind of what we're trying to show people with this project and bringing the identity to it.
So the project, I just want to add, I think that also like one of the main reasons why the Great Southern Reef doesn't get like much publicity, especially, is because Australian tourism, which I've worked with a lot, focus heavily on holidaying in warm areas. And so that's like why, and because the Great Southern Reef is so broad, like Stefan said, there's hot spots, like you can swim with sharks and sea lions and everything in South Australia, and then you got sea lions over here, and there's little pockets. But I don't think a lot of people realise it's like all one big thing. And that's something that the reason why the Great Barrier Reef and like Ningaloo have such great community behind them to protect them is because most of the time they've like come and experienced it for themselves, and tourism obviously relies on the health of the reef. So I feel like a lot of the operators and stuff along the southern coastline like would be stoked to work together to protect it, but it's, I guess they've never like known about it as one big thing, which is why the Hope Spot thing is very cool.
So let's talk about the Hope Spot, because that's really interesting. I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about the sad things associated with it, the loss of kelp, the fact that it's a little bit inaccessible next to the cliff, a little bit cold, a little bit less talked about for tourism, but there is hope on the horizon, literally, metaphorically, in all senses. So this is a recent bit of news. Tell me all about the Mission Blue Hope Spot and how you were involved with it.
So Mission Blue is an organisation run by the legendary Dr. Sylvia Earle. And if you don't know who that is, think the marine version of David Attenborough. She's truly marine royalty. And created Mission Blue with the goal to identify different regions around the world that are under-acknowledged but contribute to, are critical to the health of the ocean.
That's ticking all the right boxes so far.
Yeah, exactly. It ticked all the right boxes, and that's exactly what I thought. And the way that Mission Blue finds these hope spots is by your everyday people nominating places. And literally that's what I thought when I was reading about these hope spots. I thought, Great Southern Reef, under-acknowledged, critical to the health of the ocean, tick, tick. And so I started the nomination process a little bit. I wasn't too serious about it. I didn't know what it would entail, and it ended up being quite a process. But what we did is worked with a heap of people from Mission Blue who, after hearing about the Great Southern Reef, got super excited. They said, how can something this amazing exist and nobody knows about it? I said, you tell me.
It's pretty big. You'd struggle to miss it.
Yeah, exactly. So we worked with lots of different people from Mission Blue, marketed. They helped us with marketing and branding and writing blogs. And that's when I brought Brinkley and Stefan and Ocean Imaging on board as well, to help me out. So step one was basically convincing these guys that the Great Southern Reef was worthy of being nominated. And that was pretty cool because we got to convince Sylvia Earle and this whole panel of really influential people, like people who work on the IPCC reports and things like that. And then once they kind of gave us the all clear, they said, yep, cool, let's recognise it as a hope spot. Then we worked on the release of this announcement, and we wanted it to be as impactful as possible. We wanted to reach as many people as we could, and we thought that this was a really ideal way to do that because Mission Blue does have such a following, and they were ready to help us out. And that's what we did. We made a little video, we wrote some blog posts, and Stefan worked a lot on developing the Great Southern Reef, the project's website. And we released it in December of last year. And it was really cool to see how impactful that was. I had people from all over Australia, and I have relatives over in the US saying, oh, this is cool. Like, Sylvia Earle, awesome. And yeah, so that is now officially recognised as a hope spot. And Mission Blue are really keen to kind of keep working on this relationship and helping us out whenever we can, and sharing our messages. Stefan makes a lot of really great, short, informative videos. Like there's one about golden kelp, and then also about some really influential people along the Great Southern Reef, and Mission Blue help us out by resharing these and kind of promoting our work, which has just been super beneficial just to have access to that platform.
Yeah, the timing of the Hope Spot announcement was just perfect because I'd spent 18 months or so traveling around the country, interviewing people with a close connection to these reefs from a wide variety of backgrounds under the National Geographic grant, with this idea of really making sure that when it comes out, if it's coming out with the right branding, with the right messaging, and there's a lot of thought that was put into it. And we used the Hope Spot launch as the perfect opportunity to launch the website, launch the social media channels, to build a community around the Great Southern Reef. And also, since that launch, every week we've been releasing content and videos featuring personalities from people from a range of different backgrounds, and they have what we will link into the educational unit as well. And we see this as something that is just going to continue to build, and the support that we got from Mission Blue and the publicity around the Hope Spot really, really helped with that. So all the hard work that Sahira and Brinkley put in collaboration with us really meant that we could start this with a bang. And since that, we've seen interest continue to rise, and our plan for the future is to make a documentary using some of these interviews and more, really addressing some of the issues that are facing these reefs, but also, getting people to inspired to connect with their section of what is the largest system of the Great Southern Reef. So taking some inspiration by them people, and there's a lot that are doing some incredible work to look after their section, because what happens there will affect elsewhere. So there's some great stories, and it's really exciting to just have an outlet to be able to start getting these things out there and building community around the Great Southern Reef.
Speaking of community, a few questions now about engaging the community and being, I guess, public figures in this area of marine science, in the Great Southern Reef in particular. Clayton Mead wants to know, I'm just starting out in my marine science career and want to upskill in communication and community engagement. How perfect. Any tips where to start?
Ooh, who wants to take that one?
Well, I'll start it off. Through when I was doing my undergrad, also at UWA, I had a few choice units where I could take anything that I wanted, and I took some science communication units, and they were probably some of the best, kind of like the best baseline that I could have gotten for this kind of continuing work. And even just really simple things like it got me comfortable presenting in front of people and just comfortable having a conversation. And I think that is, well, for me, that was one of the best choices I made, and I accidentally made that one in my undergrad. So I would definitely start there for one. Anyone else got stuff to add to that?
I guess I can add to it. I was just going to say also, when I did my undergrad, obviously I know university is already quite busy, but on my weekends or in my holidays, I made like a conscious effort to reach out to different organizations or people or like causes that I was interested in. And I guess like it's very handy networking, especially while you're at university and surrounded by like-minded people, and getting to know people that are interested in the same areas of marine science or marine conservation. And you'll find then that that already forms like a little sense of community. And a lot of the coolest things that I've done are from just meeting people through volunteer opportunities. So I think that's like really valuable while you're at university to do as well. And then from there, you just keep on meeting people interested in the same stuff as you. And Stefan?
I totally agree with you, just both of you guys, taking the courses at uni, but also networking being really valuable. I was really lucky to receive this massive leg up through receiving the Rolex scholarship that helped me build those connections and get spend time alongside people that had been successful. And that was really like what you kind of need at an early point in your career, to just sort of spend time with those people that are doing really powerful work, and you see, oh wow, like this is where I could be in a few years' time. So it's about finding those role models, finding people that are doing great stuff and doing whatever you can to pick their brains, to spend time with them. And a lot of it does come down to volunteering, getting your hands dirty and getting amongst it and learning as much as possible, asking lots of questions.
Which I guess circles back to your work with the youth and the children in particular. I think it's so important. As somebody who used to work in outreach myself, it's very vital to get them as young as you can, really, and to create those tiny changes that you can grow into perhaps more impactful actions later on. Question for Stefan from Leah Wagthorn. What has been the best response you've received from a child that you've educated on our oceans?
The responses are always varied, but there's I think the best responses are actually not from showing a video in a classroom or telling stories, but when you get people in the water and seeing things for like firsthand, like we've mentioned a few times in this. I think now, like thinking of it now, I would probably have to say some of the best response was 2 years ago. I was at the giant cuttlefish aggregation, which is happening right now in southern Australia, in the top of
the giant what?
Whyalla.
It's about 5 hours drive or so from Adelaide, at the top of the Gulf there.
So it's an aggregation of cuttlefish.
All these cuttlefish are coming together, yeah. It's an absolutely incredible
awesome.
thing to go check out. And it's only in relatively shallow water. We will be putting out a lot of content around this aggregation over the next 2 weeks on the Great Southern Reef media channels. But back to the question, there's an organisation called Experiencing Marine Sanctuaries, and their mission is to get people out in the water and to firsthand see just what spectacular marine life we have. And what better place than this aggregation, because in just only 2 to 5 meters of water, you've got thousands of these crazy alien looking things just all like putting on visual displays and light shows and battling.
Is there a cuttlefish in the photo set? I think there must be. Yeah, there is. I'm flashing it up. There we go. There's a cuttlefish.
After the experience, I interviewed a few high school students that actually were from Whyalla, and this was their first time actually, for a lot of them, actually most of them, seeing the cuttlefish. The town has really embraced this aggregation now as a real big tourism pool, and people come from all over the world to see it. But it was striking to me just how many of the locals hadn't really seen what was going on there. But just seeing their faces and their reactions to connecting the stories that they had been given prior to the experience and being told about it, and then seeing it, then all of a sudden they're just like mind blown and this huge smiles on their faces. So we will have video coming out that also is like a little compilation of some of their reactions to it, and that's like every time I watch that I just like get a huge smile, and that's one of many examples of people just getting that initial connection, and then they're going to be advocates for that area and looking after it for the future.
Fantastic. Hey, there's a question just come in for, I think, Brinkley. How would you approach starting your own non-profit?
Oh,
giving away all the trade secrets.
It's I kind of went into it blindly. I mean, I was involved in like quite a few different not-for-profits, just helping out or like volunteering, and had a little bit of experience, but didn't really know what I was in for. And it's a lot of work, but I think when you are starting one, especially in like conservation with wildlife or environment or marine conservation, there is a lot of help. And there is one platform called Volley. So if you're starting out a not-for-profit or charity, it's like this platform that is very insightful and also has like volunteers in different fields which can help you with different areas, because as much as when you start a not-for-profit, you have like a specific focus. Mine was like environmental conservation, and it's like you want to be focused on that, but then you have all these other things, like you have to create a constitution, you have to have a board of directors, you have to have like all of these things that if you in the beginning you just don't know about, because you can't know what you don't know. And I mean, I guess it's also figuring out as you go and just making sure that you remain focused on like your goal and having a bit of structure, because especially with anything wildlife or environment, there's so many things. And I know with me and where I've been and my work that it's very hard to focus on one thing, because the more you know, the more you want to help, and the broader it gets. And that's like always an ongoing thing for me, is, you know, you can only do so much. But I've been so stoked to be able to do what we've done so far with Balu Blue, and so many plans for much more in the future. And it's I think just start is my biggest advice. Like, don't put heaps of pressure on yourself or have crazy big goals in the beginning. Just begin, and then just it all comes together from there. It's just like it's a marathon, not a race.
Start at the beginning. I think that's pretty wise advice. Also pretty easy to forget, I feel. It's not the beginning anymore. It's I think we're just at 5 minutes to 6, which means we're almost out of time. But I do want to finish strong. I want to finish with something that calls back to the theme and title of this show, Protecting What You Love, Turning Ocean Science into Impact. I hope you've inspired some people to love the Great Southern Reef a little bit more, perhaps at least know a little bit more about it. You've certainly inspired me. I've come away with this feeling quite actually teary-eyed and protective of our kelp and our cuttlefish and our seahorses and our weird decorator crab things and the strange sponge gardens that rise out of them deep. Final question of the show. What can we do to try and create some impact of our own? What do you want the audience to take away with them from today?
So we really want people to get involved in local groups and becoming proud of where we live.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this incredible network of kelp forests right on our doorstep, but for a lot of people, just visiting the beach kind of just stops there at the sand. And so when people get a little bit more proactively involved and joining conservation groups like Conservation Volunteers Australia, experiencing marine sanctuaries, who I mentioned before, they're great. They take on a lot of volunteers to help people get into the water, but also standing up for what you believe in too. And we saw this with the whole Fight for the Bite campaign with Equinor receiving approval to drill in the Great Australian Bight. This actually coincided with around the timing of the Hope Spot nomination too. And it kind of felt like the first time that we really started seeing communities right across this coastline seeing themselves as part of this bigger system. And yeah, when that oil spill modelling came out, and then we just saw people really coming together to sort of, well, in that case, protest against the oil drilling. But what we want more is people to be celebrating what we've got here. And if we look after it, it can continue to provide for us for generations and generations to come, because they are really valuable and productive systems. They give a lot to the Australian economy. And yeah, we really need to show a bit more appreciation to that. And by getting involved, taking inspiration from others that are doing great things, we can really see them conserved and looked after for the future. And I think Sahira might elaborate on that a little bit, just throw you in the deep end.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly the goals of ours, is to show people that we have this incredible ecosystem and to unite the people, show everyone that they are part of a bigger picture here and that their local actions can have huge positive repercussions all along the Great Southern Reef. And then I think the kind of next step for that as well is or something that the community can do once they do realise that we've got this awesome place and that they're part of the bigger picture, is to go on and then talk to other people about it as well. And I think for me, that's how I measure impact. It's not just about how many views the video gets or whatever the other analytics we can pull off Google, but it's that person who saw the video who then went and told the rest of their family and all their friends about it. And that's the real impact for me, is people talking about it and sharing our message beyond just their likes and scrolls. And that's what I would really encourage everyone to kind of take this information and pass it on.
Brinkley,
you guys pretty
words?
much I was just going to say you pretty much nailed it with both of those. And yeah, I think with the Great Southern Reef, going also and supporting like the local operators, and especially after such a hectic summer, especially in South Australia, I know that everyone lost their income and lost everything, and all through the Great Australian Bight as well, like going and like swimming with the sea lions and all of those things are actually really helpful for both like protection of the area and supporting local tourism, which often are doing science on board as well. So yeah, I definitely recommend like visiting places and going and seeing it for yourselves. And I think because of everything that's happened with COVID, it's going to be good to holiday in Australia this summer anyways. Yeah,
fantastic.
Absolutely. We're in a pretty lucky position to have such an awesome place that everyone in so many states can go out and check it out. So I think this is the perfect opportunity to do so. Don't let the cool water deter you.
I was just about to say,
cool water turn away your warm feelings. Oh. Look, I feel like we can chat forever. It is just time, so we'd have to say goodbye. I know that the chat log is still rolling with questions. So what is the best way to get the conversation going after today? How do they get in touch with you?
Well, we'd really like to, promote the Great Southern Reef hashtag. So you can just chuck that on, any like photos that you're posting, doing like amazing stuff all along this southern coast. And then, as I mentioned before, we've got a consistent stream of videos coming out on the Great Southern Reef social media channels. Barley Blue also putting out great content all the time as well. And I think you guys will have some links to those pages.
I'll just throw
in
that
the
up
video
right now.
description.
Yeah, especially the socials, because it is literally us monitoring these. We're not some massive corporation who has a social media person scrolling through. It's literally us. So if there was more questions, flick them through Great Southern Reef or Barley Blue socials, and we will see those and we'll answer them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Please do, and we're watching out for that, because I expect to see everybody in the chat log turning up and absolutely filling their Insta and their Twitter feeds with your questions. If you're interested in the Oceans Institute and what we're doing at the moment, please do check our backlog of previous live streams. We've got topics from ocean plastics to coral reefs, Antarctica, sharks, whales, space exploration as well, so watch out for those. And also please do like, subscribe, comment, the dingly dangly bell thing, which is something slightly different. Every subscription helps. It helps us keep going. It helps us line up guests for the upcoming streams into June, July, and onwards as well. And we'll see you next Oceans Day. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks for having us. Bye, guys.